Hey, everybody, and welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and our topic is FCT.
What?
Oh, who's that I'm joined with over there with the cheers?
FCT.
I've got two fabulous co-hosts. Who do I got here?
You have me, Jackie McDonald, in the right corner.
And in the left corner, it's Dr. Diana Dr. D. Perry Cruz.
What?
Hi, everybody. Hi.
No, I think that the crowd is going to boo Diana. She's like the bad
Oh, and
She's
the
the
bad guy?
heel?
Yeah.
The evil.
Ooh, she's evil Dr. D. Ooh. I'm just kidding.
Well, we're talking about wrestling. No, what? We're talking about behavior analytic research, because that's what this show is about, talking about behavior analytic research. And our topic is FCT, which you hopefully understand is short for functional communication training. Now, we've got Diana, yes?
Yeah. Woo!
Oh, I thought you were going to say something. Never mind.
No. Pumped.
Good. So tonight,
Arsenio Hall pumped.
Woo.
all right, so tonight we're going to be talking about 3 articles. The classic Carr and Durand, Reducing Behavior Problems Through Functional Communication Training from the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis back in 1985.
I was 5 years old. Diana was 6. Rob was 4.
I was 5. No, we're all 5. We're all the same age.
Some
I
are
like
80
to
some are
pretend that-
85. I was 4.
You're old. Rob's young, and I'm middle.
Rob's older than you.
I know. We're all 5.
Okay, yeah.
We were enjoying Back to the Future while Carr and Durand were working on FCT. We're going to
It
follow...
was a simpler time.
It was a simpler time. DeLoreans and FCT. We're going to follow that up with 2 more recent articles. One, Prevention of Severe Behavior Problems in Children with Developmental Disorders by Reeve and Carr. Again, Mr. Carr, from the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions from 2000. And then we're going to finish it up with a much more recent article. An evaluation of lag schedules of reinforcement during functional communication training. Effects on varied demand responding and challenging behavior by Adami, Falcomata, Muthing, Hoffman from Behavior Analysis and Practice 2017. Well, published online 2017.
Really fresh.
Yeah.
Hey, Rob, is this the first time that we've had 3 articles from 3 different journals?
Oh, gosh.
I don't know. Maybe.
I think it is.
It's pretty awesome.
I'd have to go back to figure that out, but it's pretty special.
Selects.
Yeah, we usually don't. Yeah, we usually do have either, one, maybe not from Java, or like dissemination was all behavior analysis and practice. So
Yeah.
we may have had 1 or 2. Never 3. I think 3 is
I know,
probably
so we're
the
really
first.
branching out here. It's
Yes.
exciting.
So we've got 3 articles about FCT from 3 journals and 3 different decades, pretty much. And why don't we just get started with Carr and Durand, 1985? Because, hey, that's where it all began. Back in 1985. Ronald Reagan was the president, and the nation had no means of functionally communicating. Go.
All right. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Should we talk about what functional communication training is?
Yeah,
means,
we definitely
does?
should. And when you talk about FCT, you can't say FCT training.
No,
A
that's
lot of-
redundant.
I read it a lot, and it's like FCT training, and I'm like, that means functional communication training.
Oh, yeah.
Team
I've never
training.
picked up on that. That's
Right?
good.
Or functional communication response. FCR response is a functional communication response.
Yeah, don't do that either.
But you
Yeah.
can't say FC response because then everyone thinks you're talking about some ridiculous
Facilitated
fake,
communication.
treatment.
Yeah, so just be wary when you're writing it and you read it out loud.
Man, there's a lot of ways to screw up
FCT.
And
They're-
yeah, you haven't even done the treatment yet. It's
Yeah,
just,
you
just
just
the
been
actual
talking about
writing
it.
or talking about
Yeah.
the fact it exists. My God.
So one thing I love about functional communication training is that it is a function-based treatment.
That's right.
It is a treatment that looks at the function of behavior or looks for the maintaining variable that is why the behavior occurs.
Mhm.
Layman-y terms. Layman-y. And then it seeks to teach an alternative response to take that place.
Yep. You know why I love it?
Why?
Because it relates directly to one of my favorite pieces of behavior analysis, which is the fair pair rule.
Oh, yeah. What's the fair pair rule? You should tell everyone.
I love the fair pair rule. The fair pair rule states that if you're looking to decrease a challenging behavior,
Mm-hmm.
you can't just decrease it and say that
Right.
you're all done.
Vacuum. We don't live in a vacuum.
Exactly. So the reason why that behavior is occurring most of the time is because it's maintaining some access to some socially valuable reinforcer, like
Right.
escape or attention. So if you're going to decrease that behavior, and that behavior was the only way that that individual had to access that particular thing that they really, really liked, then we need to darn well make sure that we're finding a way to replace that challenging behavior with a more appropriate alternative response
Right.
that can get at the same result.
Right. As an aside, when people talk about the fair pair rule, they also usually talk about habilitation.
Ooh.
Yeah, so I want to put those together because usually when you're talking about treatment plans, you're talking about the fair pair rule and you're talking about habilitation. So habilitation is looking to teach a behavior that's going to minimize short and long-term punishers and maximize short and long-term reinforcers. So if you're using that fair pair rule, you are actually helping to promote habilitation.
Wow.
Yeah.
The reason I like FCT the best is because I think probably of all the different treatment options you have when you're discussing treatments, say, with a family of a client or families, working as part of a school system, you're working for the school system, it makes the most sense right off the bat. Your child is having a hard time communicating a need, and that's why they're having these behaviors. And we're going to teach them how to use words as a different way to get that need met. Everyone they love hearing it because it takes a lot of the onus of, oh, my kid's so bad. Why is my kid bad? It's like, no. Your child has had a difficult time learning this alternate skill that we all acknowledge, and it can be hard for lots of people. So we're just going to work on that skill. They love it. It's got communication, decreases behavior, and it makes perfect sense. And it really gets at the heart of, I think, what makes behavior analysis, when you're able to get someone down to explain it, sound so great.
Right. We actually do functional communication training throughout our everyday, right? If we have kids. So your kids will throw a tantrum, right? They're tantruming, and you're like, I don't understand what this means.
Yeah.
I love that. When I see parents do that, I'm totally going to do it.
I'm more like the crummy parents that they discuss in the 2000 article was like, and that's why parents learn to just make their kids shut up by giving in because they're tired.
But they'll tantrum and you'll be like, I don't understand. You can use your words,
Right.
right? I love that. I'm totally doing it.
Which is a weird phrase. Let's be honest.
It really is, but I love it. I've been trying it
I love
now.
what it means.
Yeah. If we're looking at the function of why tantrum behavior is occurring and we're teaching an alternative behavior to take the place of that tantrum, we are doing FCT.
Love it.
Yeah.
So where did this come from?
Well, Rob, it all started back in 1985.
We already did that.
Right.
We did the flashback sequence again.
It came back in 1985 at the State University of New York at Stony Brook.
That sounds so nice.
I know. That's why I wanted to say it. It's pretty there.
Yeah. Stony Brook sounds like the most amazing place.
I don't think it is, but I think it's pretty.
Oh, I imagine a lot of little bridges, little rivers.
Yogurt.
Peonies.
They have yogurt there?
Oh, that's funny.
That's Stonyfield.
yeah.
That's Stonyfield.
That's Stonyfield.
It's you go it's next to the brook.
I also picture Storybrooke Village, which I think is from Super Y.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so it's really idyllic in my mind. I don't know what it's quite like in real life, but that's what we all take this back to. So Carr and Durand in 1985 did a nice little study here that's gone on to, of course, be the basis of what we use when we're teaching FCT. But it started out as, I think, them really asking some neat questions.
Yeah.
And, trying to get at the heart of why are we seeing challenging behavior in the context of these skill acquisition programs. And it was kind of ingenious the way that they approached it. So they had 4 participants who are ranging in age from 7 to 14 years old. They each engage in a variety of disruptive behavior in the context of demands.
Right. So here we're only talking about demands.
We are.
So it's good to note that with this study specifically.
But even in the context of demands, you could have some different things happening.
That's true.
And that's what they try to figure out.
Right.
So the behavior that they were seeing was pretty significant, including aggression, tantrum, self-injury, what they called opposition, which is kind of like noncompliance, or defiance, out-of-seat behavior, and stripping.
I hate stripping.
Yeah, so this was, significant that they wanted to address. And they weren't sure what was maintaining the behavior, because often you would think it's a demand situation, so it must be escape, but not necessarily.
Right.
So what they did was they initially contrived 3 different conditions to look at some of the different variables that could be in place during the work condition. So they had a condition that was called Easy 100, which they had easy task present, and the child could access or would access adult attention in 100% of the intervals.
Right.
Then, so that was a control. Then they had an easy 33. I love the name of these.
Me too.
Right? Kind of like Sum 41. You know what you didn't talk about that other day? Matchbox 20.
Oh, that's
I don't know how we left them out. Okay, but this was easy 33. And again, it was easy tasks, but they only received attention in 33% of the intervals. So the idea here is that it was a low attention condition.
Right.
Then they had
And easy tasks.
Yeah, so that part was control for. And then the third condition they were looking at was a difficult condition, which had much harder tasks, and they received attention in 100% of intervals. So that one was called difficult 100.
I wish they did difficult 33 too. That probably would have just been like a mess of problem behavior. But
yeah, I don't know what that would have told you.
Just mess of problem behavior. Basically, let's make it the worst ever. Difficult 33. We're going to make you have lots of hard work and not give you any attention.
Yep. Then they would have said, well, I guess we need to take that apart.
Yeah.
Whether it was attention or demand.
Right.
So that's what they did. And, this was right after 1984. This was right after the Dorsey, Iwata, Bauman,
Right.
Slifer, and Richmond article. So we're still playing with the whole idea of how can we tease apart what's really maintaining behavior. And this was a not dissimilar, but really interesting way to kind of look at that too. So they saw some differential results for their participants. Jim and Eve only had challenging behavior in the difficult 100 condition. So that would lead them to think that their behavior was most likely maintained by either escape from the demand or help with the demand. Tom only had challenging behavior in the easy 33 condition, so that would indicate that his behavior was probably sensitive to attention. And then Sue had challenging behavior in both the easy 33 and the difficult 100 condition, so her behavior was likely multiply maintained. And no one had these types of challenging behavior in the control condition. So that was cool.
Yeah, my most favorite graph here, though, is Jim's graph. It's the top panel. Because it's, like, beautiful. Like, literally zero responding in all conditions except for the difficult 100. And then you see immediate increase in responding with an increasing trend for both, like, the reversal of the difficult 100. It's pretty phenomenal.
It's like the second they got those cards out, he was like, oh, no.
He was like, no, I do not want to do this.
I'm not.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm
You're
not
the
doing
worst.
This.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those were pretty clear. So that was just their initial assessment that they did, and they got some interesting results. So from there, of course, they hadn't done anything yet. They just identified what the problem likely was. And then from there, what they did in the second half of this study was look to teach an appropriate alternative response in the hope of decreasing the challenging behavior. And they did that by initially having a baseline in which all the conditions were the same as the easy 33 or the difficult 100 conditions, except that the experimenter, if they had an incorrect response in the difficult condition or every 30 seconds in the easy condition, they would just come by and say, oh, do you have any questions?
That's not correct. I like that.
Oh, yes, if it was incorrect, they said, that's
not correct. Do you have any questions?
Yes, but they didn't do anything else.
Yeah.
And then what they did from there was they taught a relevant response in the condition that it made sense to teach in. Right. So in the difficult condition, they taught the child to say, I don't understand. And then once they said that, they helped them complete the task. And in the easy condition, they taught them to ask, am I doing good work?
So you could be like, yes, you are.
Yes,
like
exactly.
That. Attention.
So they taught them to respond in those conditions. And then they also did a really interesting thing, in that they taught them the irrelevant response as well. In the difficult condition, they taught them to ask, am I doing good work? And gave the exact same response. Yes,
right.
You're doing great. And in the easy condition, they also taught them to say, I don't understand. And then they gave them the answer, which they already knew because it was the easy condition.
Right.
So by doing that, they really built in another type of control there, right? You know, Jackie, a long time ago, we've talked about withdrawal versus reversal.
Yep.
Right. And withdrawal is just you have one treatment you're comparing to a no treatment baseline. And a reversal condition, you have a treatment that you have in place where you're perhaps reinforcing a particular response. And you also test for a reversal condition in which you reinforce an opposite response.
Right.
So this was interesting to me because they have a similar type of control built in here where they're not just looking to see, did we increase the behavior we wanted to see, but they're also testing to see, did dissimilar behavior increase or decrease as well when we applied the same reinforcement contingencies to it.
So when I was looking at this, Diana, I like saying your name.
You can call me Dr. D.
When I was looking at this, Dr. D, I think that it was a good control for Jim and Eve and Tom, but not necessarily for Sue, since her behavior was multiply maintained. Even in the easy 100 or the easy 33 and the difficult 100, she's still maybe wanting to access some other. I know that's very layman-y, but access attention or.
If you keep using that word, it becomes real.
I know. I have a doctorate. I have poetic license. I'm wondering, there I don't necessarily feel for her that.
That's a really good point.
Right? Because for her, if she has multiply maintained behavior, we're not necessarily sure if she's engaging in the behavior in the difficult 100 to access attention or to escape from demands, even though, because it's both. Just because we have demands in place doesn't necessarily mean that she doesn't also want some sort of attention.
Yeah, but she's not getting the same type of attention.
But she is in this control because they're saying, am I doing good work, providing praise in next command. So she's getting the same.
I guess.
I
got to look at the graph.
Okay.
Let's look at the graph.
Let's look at the graph, yeah.
Okay.
We're going. Going to the graph. We're going to the graph. Here we go.
There it is.
Should be on a kid show. It's the graph.
Let's talk about Jim, Eve, and Tom.
Yeah,
first,
that's smart.
And then we'll break down Sue from there.
Like a breakdown, like disco.
Yes. So overall, they saw what they were expecting to see here. In baseline phases, there were moderate to high rates of challenging behavior or disruptive behavior occurring. What I should also say is they did a withdrawal and a reversal design kind of mixed together here, right? They had a baseline phase in which nothing was reinforced. They had an irrelevant response phase in which functional communication response that they were teaching did not match the proposed reinforcer for that condition. Then they went back to baseline. Then they introduced a relevant response phase. This is for Jim and Eve. And then for Tom, they did it the other way around. They introduced a relevant response phase. They returned to baseline. They returned to relevant response. Back to baseline. Then back to the irrelevant response, etc. And then for everyone, they ended with the relevant response phase, as you should if you're doing ethically sound research here. Like I said, overall baseline levels were moderate to high for all participants, and they returned to those levels every time that they returned to the baseline phase. So nothing was being reinforced. We saw that return to the disruptive behavior that was previously reinforced. During the irrelevant response phase, challenging behavior generally remained pretty high. And what we saw was the irrelevant response. Initially, it was being prompted, and then the prompting was faded out. So initially, we saw the irrelevant response occurring, but as the session continued, rates of that irrelevant response dropped out because it wasn't producing access to the reinforcer that should be maintaining it.
Yeah.
And then during the relevant response phase, relevant responding continued to occur at high levels throughout the phase because it was producing the reinforcer that we were looking to access. And then for Sue...
Wait, I do want to say that for some of the relevant response phases, you do see a little bit of responding for the irrelevant response, but it quickly decreases. But that's just good to note that there was some variability in responding.
Yeah, that's true. And good to note, too, because previously that was what was being prompted, even if it wasn't producing access to the reinforcer. So it makes sense that they might have to test out what was going on here and what was going to produce the reinforcer.
Yeah.
This is all new learning for them. So for Sue, in the easy 33 condition, and during baseline in those conditions, her responding for disruptive behavior was really high, like 100%.
Super high.
Pretty much across the board. Once the relevant response was introduced, which was, am I doing good work, disruptive behavior decreased to absolute zero, and the relevant response maintained throughout the phase. When the irrelevant response was introduced, which was, I don't understand.
Yep.
Right. Disruptive behavior immediately jumped back up to
100%.
And the irrelevant response did not maintain. So that to me says that she's really looking for that praise statement in this condition.
It's true.
To reinforce her behavior.
That's why it's great to look at the graphs. So my previous comment was wrong. But that's okay.
It seems like she was pretty sensitive to the condition that was in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the difficult 100, you see the exact same thing. So problem behavior was highest in the irrelevant phase condition and lowest in the relevant phase condition. So it's always great to look at the graphs and not just look at what you think is going to happen. You like how I turned that around? Teachable moment.
Very nice.
Yeah,
That
so
you
it
always need
worked.
to look at the graph. Yeah.
It worked for her too. And
So it did show good control.
these are cool graphs. They have data paths for the disruptive behavior, and then they have shaded boxes in different shades for the FCR.
Yeah.
FCR response.
Recipe response.
So it's a neat graph. I like the way that it looks. Honestly, I'm not sure that I read this study.
You did.
I did.
Yeah, we read it in our master's program.
That was a long time ago.
I know, but we did read it.
All right. Well, I read it with fresh eyes today, I have to say, and I was like, oh, this is beautiful. I just loved it. I thought it was really creative, the way that they approached this particular
It's a great one.
problem, and they were able to teach exactly what they needed to teach to have behavior decrease.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I loved it.
It's always good to go back to where it all started.
Yeah.
So then when we start now and see where we've gone, it's kind of fun. It's so fun to look at those
It was a
seminal
good trip
articles.
down
Yes.
memory lane.
Mm-hmm. Well, then moving on to, I think, the next Carr article with the prevention of severe behavior problems in children with developmental disorders. Now, this was not in JABA, it was in the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions. And I don't read that journal too often, some citations, but I did find it interesting in how I think it read FCT as almost felt like a whole story. Like they really went into the why and the how, and
They did weave a beautiful tale.
It was a little looser, let's talk about why would this happen and how could this be and what
It was like they
would
gave
this
them
result
an
in?
unlimited number of pages.
Yes.
They're like, go
They're
for
like,
it.
you just write whatever you want. Make it sound pretty.
So it was an easy read in that sense because it really just went into here's why you do FCT and here's what we think might happen if you don't and why this might be a good behavioral inoculation.
Oh, nice word.
Well, it was in the article. I
know,
didn't
but
make it
still.
up. But I don't usually hear FCT as a behavioral inoculation. The only thing I've ever seen is behavioral inoculation. I think would be a good behavior game.
That's
so it
when
was
we talked
interesting.
about it last.
Yeah.
It is interesting to think about because I guess it makes sense if you teach kids how to use language to get their needs met. They won't engage in challenging behavior that often.
When I read this article, I thought it would be a good one to have in our back pocket for parents that want to read articles that are not drowny articles.
This
one's a great parent-directed article, even though it's probably not directed toward parents, but I mean, it's a good one.
I think it's perhaps directed towards general educators.
Right.
Yeah, more
Right.
general practitioners
So
or any practitioner.
this one's a nice one to have in your back pocket if someone's like, I want to read some articles. And you're like, here you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think coming off of our recent discussions about dissemination and talking to non-behavior analysts,
Right.
like seeing how they were able to straddle the line here of explaining what they were doing in easy to understand, non-condescending terms,
Right.
and yet always relating it back to the core behavior analytic principles that were in play was really nice. And it seems as though they had the luxury of being able to expound upon that and explain things in multiple ways. It was nice to read.
Yeah, it was really nice to read.
In that sense. I think someone who isn't that familiar with our field and the type of work that we do could consume this article. So it was cool.
Yeah.
It was cool to read, yeah.
Now, before we get into the meat of the article itself, let's take a moment to stop and go through one of our secret code words. So for those of you who are new to our show, ABA Inside Track is a continuing education provider for BCBAs and BCABAs. So when you are listening to the episode, you want to listen in for these two secret code words. And if you would like to apply for continuing education credits, you can either go to the webpage or click on the info link in your podcast player, put in your name, BCBA number, the episode number, 28, and these two secret code words. And you click the button and everything gets sent to us and we will mail you a beautiful certificate through email. The first of the secret code words is sweater, SWEATER. It's usually kind of fancy and it's used to catch your sweat, maybe. I don't know what the purpose of this thing is. If you live in England, it might be a jumper.
Yeah, it makes you sweat.
Don't write jumper, it's sweater.
Right. So we are in America.
Yes.
We call it a sweater. Jumper is a nicer word, but in America, a jumper means a romper.
Romper, romp.
Bringing it all back around.
All right. Anyway, sweater. So let's get on to the Reeve and Carr article.
One thing I love about printing out articles is that you can tell what you were eating when you were reading it. So mine has little Cheeto fingers all over
Oh.
the
That's nice.
article because I was eating
Mine-
Cheetos.
one page is stuck together because it has popsicle juice on it.
See, so now, like, in your life, you should print out articles, kill trees, but then you'll know what you were eating, like, 10 years down. You're like, oh, one time, actually, it's a tangent. It'll be a really quick one, sorry. But it's funny. I was reading an article, and I had a little mark, and I had put a little arrow and wrote hot chocolate so that I would know what the mark was later on in my life. Funny.
It's good to use your research
Like a little
to
time capsule
remember
there.
your life.
Right? Had hot chocolate when I was eating that one. Okay,
Fabulous.
let's talk about the article.
All right. So similarly to the Carr and Durand article, purpose of this study was to use FCT to decrease challenging behaviors. But like we were saying, this article really wanted to look at how would it work compared to just sort of what other people typically do. What do we usually do when kids are whining and fussing? And also to look at the idea of, well, if we allow behaviors to go unchecked, sort of the whining and the minor problem behaviors, will they just keep getting worse and worse over time? And that was sort of the general hypothesis going through this article.
It sure was. I'm going to keep talking, I guess, because even though I talked about...
I know, it was your turn.
The other
That's why I
article.
jumped in a little bit. I wanted to just see you
Give
got
me
a
a
break.
breather.
Get a little break.
Thanks. So I did like this article a lot, but I do have to say I feel like the title is a little clickbaity.
Yeah, it
Right?
is.
Prevention of severe problem behaviors in children with developmental disorders.
Mhm.
So when I read that, I was like, ooh. But
Well, I think it gets to the crux of the issue, which was not simply we can decrease behaviors with FCT, so much as the whole idea of, man, kids engage in all these behaviors to get attention or to escape, and it makes sense why they do it, because they get positively reinforced. But why do we as adults respond to these behaviors? Because they're we know they're challenging behaviors. It's not like, well, whining is an acceptable response. We don't like it, but we want the whining to stop, and it's a lot easier to just provide the attention or provide the escape. We're negatively reinforced, our just acquiescence. So I think the crux of it's
You're
not
using
as sim-
such big
Thank
words
you.
today. It's
Thank
good.
you so much. So the crux of the article is not so much we can use FCT as an alternative as, hey, there's a reason behaviors get worse and worse and worse. And sort of reading it, I talk a lot to new parents, parents with young children with a disability who are talking about how their child's behavior is getting increasingly worse. That's usually a lot of what I talk about, is that lack of communication and how it's snowballed. And especially, new staff or people who are new to the field, they always seem kind of curious as how could these behaviors happen? Like they sort of just sprung. I was going to say this simply, Jackie. I'm going to say it as flowery as possible, just for you, though, okay?
Yes.
So here's one. Sort of like these behaviors sprung fully formed from Zeus's head.
Oh.
What? Oh, that's right, everybody.
wow.
Someone put on their
Just
smart
like
cap
Hera?
today.
It might not be a duck.
Who's-
That would be Athena.
Athena. Oh gosh,
Athena.
I'm so embarrassed.
Yes.
I
I may
don't
not be a doctor, but I did go to the Ivy Leagues, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't even know what you're
well.
talking about. So
La di da.
So I used up all my brain power discussing that illusion. So please
Okay.
continue.
I'll keep talking. So yeah, I feel like, like I said, I was like, ooh, severe problem behaviors in children with developmental disorders. That's, right up my alley.
something you would hit on Facebook, be like, "Oh, what's this article going to be
How
about?"
do we? But first of all, the behavior that they are presenting in this article is not really severe.
No, not really.
Not by the standard that I judge
Right.
behavior to be severe.
No one's dying. There's no eye gouging.
Yeah,
There's
But
no, like,
who's the article for, though? I think you both talked
Right.
about it. These
I
probably
know.
aren't articles meant for
true.
behavior analysts who are working in institutions.
Rob.
I know you guys thought I was falling asleep on this one, but no, no, you can't see it at home. I did spend about the last 10 minutes sort of hunched in my chair, but I'm awake. I'm paying attention.
He's back, ladies and gentlemen.
Awesome.
Okay.
That's true, though. I like that. You're right.
And
It's- that is a severe problem behavior for a teacher of a classroom.
And
that's true. And they do a lot of work in this article on social validity.
Yeah, they do.
And I know that I knew you were going to like that, Jackie.
and in
Dream
2000,
team.
Yep.
I feel like that's only become really hot to do social validity in the past like
This
3,
was in
4 years.
2000.
This is
2000.
ahead of the game.
I know.
Yeah. So, okay. So maybe you're right. Maybe for the audience, we could justify the use of severe.
Donna, I win the argument. I must shut off your mic now, and you're no longer allowed to participate.
Mic
Sweet. I'm going to go eat some Cheetos.
No, wait. They'll still come in on my mic. You can't. They're too cam crunchy.
But I'm also not 100% sure that we are proving with this article that we're preventing severe problem behavior from occurring.
No, maybe not the prevention. I think
Right.
it's more the acceleration or the strengthening of problem behavior.
Yeah. And I mean, well, I guess I'll lay out how the article is structured because they do and they're trying to make that argument that they're
Right.
preventing this from occurring. So what they did, they had 16 children with developmental disabilities. They were young. They were aged 33 to 50 months.
I hate months.
I'll do that math for you.
Thank
it was
you.
2.9 to a little over 4 years.
Okay, good. Because even right now, people are like, how old is your baby? And I'm like, I don't know, somewhere between 2 and 3 months. You guys figure
She's
it
pretty
out.
small.
Not
Yeah.
1, but not 0.
Yeah, somewhere in between.
So they're fairly young kids. These were preschool age children. 8 of those 16 children were labeled target child, meaning they were children who engaged in some of these problem behaviors, which included aggression, whining, tantruming,
Noncompliance.
noncompliance, some self-injury,
Yeah.
like head to object. The other 8 children were non-target children. They were just present because this particular intervention they were doing was conducted in a dyad where they had divided attention between the 2 children. So there are no data taken on the other 8 kids. So you can really mostly think of this as 8
Yeah.
kids in the study. So those kids, they divided them by a flip of the coin into 2 different groups. One group was going to receive functional communication training, and the
Training.
other...
Training.
Did I say that?
No, you didn't.
Oh, okay.
I just think it's fun.
Gotcha. And so one group was going to receive functional communication training, and the other group was going to receive expressive language training, or ELT.
Yeah. One thing I love about the introduction of this article is when they're talking about functional communication training, they call it a nip it in the bud strategy.
Yeah.
They really were not being super sciencey with those beginning words.
Nip it in the bud.
It's one of those nip it in the bud strategies, which I think is where the prevention comes from and
Right.
the behavior inoculation, the idea of you can use this strategy and then the behavior goes away and then it won't get worse. And now you have this great skill to access reinforcement and you never be bad again.
As an aside, I used to think that nip it in the bud was nip it in the butt.
I think people do think that.
Oh my God, everyone, for the love of God, it's nip it in the bud like a flower.
Yeah.
If I ever, just so you know, if you meet any of us, we're so nice. We'll be, if you come up and say like, oh, you're being so track, I think that's a podcast. That would be enough for us to give you a hug or buy you lunch.
I'll give you
But-
a high five.
Oof, but if you follow that up with, anyway, I have to go nip something in the butt, just forget
We
it.
can't be friends.
No, that's...
So I used to think that. So
Ugh.
good thing I don't think it anymore. I'd
Good.
be kicked
You-
off of the
that would be
podcast.
I'd shut your mic off. I'm going to turn off everyone's mic.
Is the reason for that if you're pruning a plant and you nip it in the
It's-
bud, then it
It's-
won't
it's-
grow?
It's a flower or green.
They literally say it like 4 or 5 times. Nipped in the bud.
They really
They
did
said it
like
a
that.
lot.
It's a good phrase.
I love it too, but can you imagine? Like, I just can't imagine. Like,
Nip it. Nip it.
Nip it.
That's from Andy Griffith's show.
Oh, I don't know. Don't watch that either. Turns out I watch no good TV. Remember we did that episode?
Was Andy Griffith's show a good TV
Yeah,
show?
I don't know. I only watch Teen
no,
Mom 2.
but it's a classic.
Yeah, I only watch Teen Mom 2. So, and The Bachelor. My
No,
brain's
we're not really
dead.
on the same page.
No, I came here once and I was like, Dana, let's watch a show. And she's like, you really watch this? And I was like, yeah, it's great. And she's like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen.
I feel
okay.
like The Bachelor would be a show where everyone's trying to nip things in the butt all the time.
But with the B-U-T-T. Okay, anyway. Method, what
and then
they do.
get their own show.
Yeah, they do.
By
Called Nip It
being-
in the Butt.
Anyway.
It's okay.
Miami style. That's the name of the show.
I have nothing to say to that.
Anyway.
ELT,
2 groups.
FCT.
4
ELT
kids.
training and FCT training.
4 kids per group plus their little dyad pair who there's no data on. Initially, all of them had an FA, which they described in detail.
Yeah, like.
Every piece of the conditions of the FA.
And then.
That's okay.
Yeah, it's all right. They
'Cause,
can.
You know, they really tried to be very inclusive in this article, and I did appreciate that. So everyone's challenging behavior was maintained by attention. First of all, we know that now. In the FCT group, they continue to present pieces of curricula from the regular preschool curriculum to each child in the dyad, but they also taught the target child to engage in a functional communication response to access attention, either tap on the shoulder or say, excuse me, and they then could access attention. The ELT group, they did not teach them how to respond to challenging behavior. They said just continue doing whatever you normally do. And then they taught them expressive language skills.
Sure.
Was what they were doing as their alternate control training.
Okay.
And that mostly involved teaching them how to answer WH questions, not related to gaining attention or increasing sort of their overall functioning in the classroom, but just like, why do you like to eat food, and questions like that. The other thing to know, and this is important, is that for the FCT group, it was FCT plus extinction.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah. So they did an initial baseline, 60-minute sessions, no instruction on how to address challenging behavior. Then each group received their respective training, the FCT group and the ELT group. They took data on the frequency of challenging behavior, the intensity of challenging behavior.
Oh, that's hard.
Yep. So they had observers who were, they emitted a subjective measure, but they recorded on a Likert scale 1 to 7 whether they felt like the intensity of the challenging behavior was mild, moderate, or severe. Interesting enough, they got 100% IOA.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
Wow. They all knew
I
each
don't
other.
know how they did
The
that.
descriptions were pretty good, but I mean, they were the general, well, I think someone could really get hurt. They probably won't get hurt, which I don't know how you can get good IOA on. So, wow, bravo.
I know.
Unless it was, they saw each other write things down. Looks like they wrote a 4. I think it must be a 4.
That's not IOA then.
No.
I mean, they circled the middle of the page.
It is the topography of IOA. It's just not really IOA.
Yeah, I don't think they did that.
No.
They took data on the frequency of functional communication response in the sense that they looked at how many 10-second intervals in which it occurred. So it was sort of like a frequency of intervals. And then they also, like I mentioned, did a social validity measure. And this was pre-post. They took some samples of individuals and the baseline and follow-up probe conditions. They gave those samples to 12 special educators who were blind to the study and which group the children were in, and they used the same rating scale to measure the intensity of their behavior. So they really considered the intensity of the behavior to be the number one DV.
Mm-hmm.
So each of the 2 comparison groups, they ran out their training, and if children showed an increase in their intensity of challenging behavior, they had a plan in place to move them to the other training group.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Smart.
However, they only had to move kids from the ELT group to the FCT group, as you maybe could have guessed.
And they did too. They were pretty upfront in their beginning of, we think the following things are going to happen.
Yeah.
And then they laid out that the kids in ELT will not learn anything and they'll have to go to the FCT group.
Yes, which is also
Spoiler.
unusual because
Spoiler
They put it
alert.
at the front. I mean, they put
I
their
know.
4 hypotheses, which, I mean, again, I usually see, purpose statement usually has a clear sense of this is what we expect to see or what we were curious about. This was very much, this is totally what's going to happen, everybody. Just watch and learn.
And I think that's just a difference in the type of journal this is
Right.
being published in.
Yes.
Because generally in behavior analytic journals, we don't lay out a particular hypothesis and a null hypothesis. We just say, this is what we want to test and see what happens. And whatever happens is
Right.
awesome.
Yeah.
But here they really did lay out an actual hypothesis. So I thought that was interesting.
It reminds me of one of those movies, where it starts in media res and they're sort of looking at all these kids with their great FCT or these great FCRs, and it sort of pauses, freeze frames. I bet you're wondering how we got here with this ELT treatment being so crummy and FCT being great. Well, let's go back a bit, and then they go back and describe the research.
I can totally picture that.
Yeah, Jackie can make up crazy stories about what graphs she jumps on the graphs. I'm going to make up crazy stories about movies related to the journal articles I read. That's my thing now.
You can do it.
It's my thing.
But it's in the context of like the teacher sitting there and trying to teach the kids, and they're like throwing materials over her head, right, and jumping on the table, and she's like,
How did I
you're
get in this
wondering.
study group? I bet you're wondering. Well, someone flipped a coin, and here I am.
Yep.
That's awesome.
So the results of the study play out probably exactly how you might imagine them to. All target children who are in the ELT group needed to move to the FCT group in order to learn the functional communication response. None of them learned it on their own, and their challenging behavior continued to increase in intensity while they were in the ELT group. Yeah, like I said, so intensity was higher for the target children in the ELT group, with the exception that there was one student in the FCT group who did have a relatively high level of intensity of behavior.
Target student 4.
Number 4.
I think she,
We don't know.
is not following their hypothesis. It's the twist of the movie. It's the M. Night Shyamalan twist of this article.
Yeah, so perhaps they didn't have a full control over his or her behavior. But when the children from the ELT group did move over to the FCT group, they saw a decrease in the intensity of their behavior, which is great. That's what you'd like to see. And really it was the same pattern as far as the frequency of challenging behavior as well. It looked almost identical on the graph to the intensity graph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty neato.
So limitations here, like I said, in the FCT condition, functional communication training was paired with extinction. So when challenging behavior occurred, they were instructed to ignore that and prompt the functional communication response. And in the ELT group, they were given no additional instruction. They said that their general MO of the instructors was to ignore for a while. Mm-hmm. This is what you do. This is exactly what people do. Is you initially ignore until it gets bad enough, and then you have to intervene and give them attention.
Right.
Which is exactly how these behaviors get shaped up.
Absolutely.
To start with. So that's they didn't give them instruction, but that's generally what they were doing.
I think they did a very nice description too of that trajectory. Why would behavior get more and more intense? And that idea of not only is it sort of the student has to keep increasing the intensity, and then they sort of learn this, I'll just go to this response right now, and let's save us all a lot of time. I know you're going to give me attention. Why don't I just throw something at your face first? And it was just a really great description, and it definitely took out, which is again why I think this is a nice article for non-practitioners, like you said, Jackie. Any sense of blame or you're being a bad person because you're reinforcing this, but just, hey, this is what is happening. It's understandable why this is happening. Everyone's getting reinforced. It's just all these behaviors are getting reinforced to a point where you see this big challenging behavior that now you can't really handle the same way.
It's just the fact of the matter, right? The other thing that they noted here was that for the children in the ELT group, they did have a higher rate of problem behavior in baseline than in the FCT group.
So what they could have done is they could have looked at proportional responding in baseline versus the ELT group, and proportional responding in baseline via the FCT group.
That might have been a little much.
Yeah, that's true for this article, but they, we could actually go back and do that. So we could look at their graphs and figure that out and see what was more resistant. Yeah. I did that once with a Lerman and colleagues article that was published in 1996. I went through
that.
Do you remember that?
I do.
And I had to look at the graph, and I had a ruler.
Yeah.
And I took each data point, and I used the ruler to go to the y-axis to figure out the exact number. Man, that was a nightmare. It took me forever. You remember?
I totally remember that, yeah.
Why did you do that?
Because I was looking at the proportion of responding across these two different graphs.
But
so that I could compare for my thesis.
Oh, okay, for your thesis.
Yeah,
okay.
I was just looking and...
Just for fun.
For
funsies.
And it literally took me a long time. But I got some interesting data. Yeah.
So I mean, they could certainly have done that here. Yeah. And then the children were assigned to groups based on a flip of a coin.
Right.
And they also pointed out that the frequency of behavior was not their main DV. It was the intensity of behavior, which did not have quite the same drastic difference between the two groups.
Right.
But it still is a little bit of a limitation.
Yeah.
Too bad. If it had been the other way around, they probably still would have seen the positive results that they had, and it would have been a stronger case. But that just wasn't the way it shook out when they initially assigned kids to groups. So it's something to consider. But overall, I thought this was neat. I thought the way they had designed the study was kind of cool.
Yeah.
They didn't have to include this other control group, but they did. And in doing so, it also allowed for one group to have a delay to treatment. And during that delay, their behavior continued to increase.
Right.
So I'm still not sure that we can fully say by introducing FCT, we have a complete prevention of behavior because they're two different groups of children. But you do certainly see a pattern of responding in the group that was not receiving treatment. And one could postulate that introducing the FCT prevented the other group from increasing the intensity of their
increasing it, but not preventing it from occurring altogether.
Well, they're saying that they're preventing severe challenging behavior from emerging. But that's a little bit of a strong statement to be making.
Right. I agree.
But it's still cool.
It's still cool.
So when we think about FCT, this is something that I'm sure almost all of us have used in our own practice. We've recommended as treatments. We've read other articles about FCT. But then when we were talking about some more recent FCT articles, Jackie, you pulled up the evaluation of lag schedules and its use in FCT, which I think is perfect because I know one of the complaints I have lots of people give me about FCT is, well, I don't want them to just say, look at me, or give me a break, or can I have I want them to say 50 different things. And certainly there's always the idea of, well, I guess you could train some different responses, reinforce them on different schedules, but it always gets very complicated when you're just talking about maybe your technicians or your RBTs running those types of treatments because, well, the behavior's gone down. Do we want to spend all this time and effort in looking at how do we generalize these terms? Sometimes it just magically happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't. And you found this one with our old friend, the lag schedule.
Oh my God, I love lag schedules. I was so
Episode 2?
excited.
Was
yeah,
it 2, right?
I
It's been a long
was
time.
2. Yeah, I was like, it's a lag schedule, and I got
Yeah.
real jazzed. Because if anyone doesn't know me, they know I love a good lag schedule.
That's right.
I look for lag schedules. Well, I just love it too because, lag schedules are scary for people, and they shouldn't be scary because they're really not that scary.
Since we
No,
probably,
they have a scary name.
They do.
Yeah, well, since some folks may not have ever listened to episode 2, which might have been the only other time we spent any discussion of lag schedules
Right.
on.
Episode 2 is about novel behavior, guys.
Right.
Yes, but what is a lag schedule?
So a lag schedule, all lag schedule means is that you are reinforcing a response that may be different than the previous response depending on the number. So like a lag 0, nothing has to be different. Lag 0 means there has to be nothing different. The response can be the exact same every single time. A lag 1 schedule means that the response that occurs has to be different than the response that previously occurred.
Yes,
For a lag
but
1.
only the immediately
Only the-
preceding response.
Right. And if it's a lag 2 schedule, that means that the response that occurred has to be different from the last 2 responses that were previously emitted. So the number after lag just means how many variations you need previously before you're going to receive reinforcement for the response.
Yeah. So if I were, say, reinforcing you by giving you social attention for different variations on hello, if it were a lag 0, I'd just respond to your hello. Lag
Hello.
1, you'd say hello. I'd say
Hi.
nothing. You need to say hi. I'd say,
Right.
oh, hi. Hey. Lag 2 would be you'd have to say hello, hi, what's
Howdy.
up, howdy, before
Yeah.
I responded. Okay.
Yeah. So I just love lag schedule.
So lag infinity is
Oh,
you
gosh.
can never have produced that response before in your entire life.
Right. Completely novel behavior. But we don't typically use a lag
No?
infinity. No. Because remember, all behavior is not necessarily novel. It contains little bits of our atomic repertoires of our behavior, remember?
Yes, fair enough.
Palmer,
Atomic
2012.
rep-
It's on the
All
atomic
of our
repertoire.
Someone would
behavior
have
is
to have been
made of
observing you your
stardust.
Right.
entire life
Yeah, that would be hard.
in order to determine a lag infinity schedule. So
Yeah.
it's a little unrealistic.
I think humans also really, I mean, you look at the media we consume, there's only so much novelty I think we ever
Yeah.
really want to get.
That's true.
Don't reinforce that show. It's way too different than the last 10 shows we watched. Go back to easy.
That's funny.
Give me a sitcom.
That's funny. If you're going to read this article, another term that is scary for people that comes up in this article is resurgence. So we talk about resurgence in the discussion a little bit because that is a common concern when you're using lag schedules. And so I just want to tell you what resurgence is. So resurgence is the emergence of a previously extinguished response, or a previously reinforced response is newly extinguished. So let's say my example of resurgence is I have a child that will scream out in class, right? So
Okay.
I put that response on extinction, right?
Done.
Okay. And then another response emerges where now he is raising his hand but waving it wildly. So I
Okay.
put that behavior on extinction.
Mm-hmm.
And when that behavior goes on extinction, it's a newly reinforced response. The yelling out comes back,
Gotcha.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it was previously extinguished and they're in the same response class. And it comes back once the newer behavior that was reinforced is now extinguished. Does that make sense?
The key is that there was a new behavior in
Yes.
between.
There was a new behavior, it was put on extinction, and then the old behavior came back in its place.
Yeah.
And they're
no,
both-
it totally makes sense.
Right. And they're both in the same response class.
So not the same as just I put that behavior on extinction and then I got sloppy with my extinction and
No,
then
no,
everybody
no.
came back.
Yeah. No. Extinction, usually with resurgence, extinction is going great. But it's just how it happens.
I was trying to make an analogy to in my mind, in my private events.
Get out the old mind file.
I got it open.
Get out your old homunculus.
My homunculus was trying to make a analogy to a relapse in addiction,
Sure.
right? So if you previously were addicted to some particular substance.
You're addicted to alcohol, then you
Right.
start smoking, you start giving up smoking, and then you want to drink alcohol again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you have some positive behavior in place
Oh,
that's
yeah.
going really well, and then you hit a snag in
Yeah.
your 12-step
Sure.
program, or
And you
your
go-
sponsor leaves and you can't access talking to them as a reinforcer, and so you go back.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, so that's an example of resurgence. So resurgence is used a lot in the basic literature. People tend to shy away from it in the applied literature because they think it's scary, but it's not really that scary. It's something that
Yeah.
happens, so it's something you have to think about and be aware of. So when we're talking about lag schedules, it's something that's very real, right? That can happen because we are putting some
Right.
behavior on extinction, right? We're putting challenging behavior on extinction. So if we are reinforcing variability of responding, we may see a potential that when you're putting one appropriate behavior on extinction, because you're looking for variability, that
Yeah.
challenging behavior may come back.
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking at. Yeah, so
Okay.
I was like super jazzed when I saw this. I was like, yay! I wish I would have done it. So we all know that functional communication training is effective, right? So they're just looking at here now.
Are there any articles I can read to tell me about functional communication training, Jackie?
Rob, you were asleep again. Wake
oh,
up.
sorry.
Stop, rewind, and listen to the first part. So I love this because, like you said, one of the main...
Stumbling blocks?
Yes, thank you. Or one of the main criticisms of behavior analysis is that we teach rote responding, right? So
Mm-hmm.
using a lag schedule helps promote variability and novelty in responding, so it helps lay that criticism to bed. We're going to put it to sleep. Just like saying that.
Tuck it in nice and tight. We do the story. Tell it good night. Let it get one drink of water. Then you gotta go back to sleep.
Give it the bedtime pass.
Exactly.
That's awesome. So here, they didn't use a lot of participants. They only had 2 participants. But what is noteworthy is one of the participants was 23 years old and had self-injurious behavior. So
It was quite a range
Right.
of their participants.
Yeah, one was
23
10
and one was 10.
yeah.
When I think about 23-year-olds, though, I love it when people use older participants, because then you just have a longer history of reinforcement for that problem behavior to overcome. So I always, when you see results
Mm-hmm.
with older participants, you're like, oh yeah, that definitely works.
Yep.
When you see with a 2 or 3-year-old, you're like, okay, yeah.
They may not
Okay, yeah.
have the same generality to
Right.
other populations.
But man, was I excited there. So for both of our participants, they ran a functional analysis first, and for our first participant, John, his behavior served a tangible function, which, remember, I like to pull out this little aside that if you don't suspect a tangible function, do not put it in your functional analysis,
Yeah.
because then you will actually strengthen that response. I've done that before, and it was a bad idea. So I like to
You
warn
created
people.
a whole new
Yeah. A whole
monster.
new aberrant behavior, yeah. And Fred had a history of aggression, and his behavior served an escape function. John typically used a speech output device and card exchange for communication purposes, and Fred used a vocal communication response. But they could never understand what he was saying, so they also used cards for
Oh,
him.
good. Okay.
Yeah. So one interesting thing here is that when they talk about the different man topographies that they use, in this article they don't specifically tell us the varied mans that they taught each participant.
No.
So in the measurement section, they talk about the mans including iPad activation, card exchange, microswitch activation, and vocal requests for Puzzle with John, but they don't tell us specifically what mans they taught and what mans they varied for each participant, which
Yeah.
would have been nice, but
I wish I wanted that information.
this was only 5 pages long, so maybe they could not be as eloquent as Reeves and Carr.
Right.
They may have had a word requirement.
I think so, but I still wanted it.
Yeah, I did too. They had really nice IOA, which I love. For the most part, they did 32% of the sessions. They did have one session that must have been low, because for the varied mans, they had an agreement of 67%.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay, because it was overall high at 97%, but they probably had one bad session.
Yep.
But it's good to know when you're looking at that. And so, yeah, they used an ABCBCAC reversal design. So the A certifies baseline, B is an FCT lag 0, to make just sure that functional communication training
Right.
works. And then they use an FCT lag 1 schedule where they had to use varied man topographies in order to access reinforcers.
Super.
Cool. So for baseline, they provided 1 minute of pre-session access to a high preferred stimuli for John. Remember, he served a tangible function. His behavior served a tangible function, not him. His behavior.
That's right.
And then challenging behavior, continued on challenging behavior. The experimenter provided 30 seconds access of that high preferred stimuli, just like in the FA condition. And the same thing for Fred. If Fred engaged in challenging behavior, he was given access to a break during baseline. And then in the FCT lag 0, both conditions were similar to baseline with the exception that the man topography produced access to the desired reinforcer and the challenging behavior was placed on extinction.
Okay.
Right? And you didn't have to vary anything. So he could just say, I want, and it would always be given to him.
I want break.
I want break. I want that tangible item
Mm-hmm.
each time.
Okay.
And then for the FCT lag 1, very similar, right? Except that the man topography had to vary from the previous response in order for reinforcement to be delivered.
Did they have any additional discriminative stimuli present between these two conditions? Or just the contingency?
They don't actually say, so it must just be the contingency.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just curious.
That would probably be helpful, but they don't say that they had a card or...
And they didn't train the varied response, right? So was
they
it in their
sprung up.
repertoire?
I think these were all in their repertoire. Previously,
Okay.
they just weren't using them.
Okay.
That's what it seems. That's what it seems like. So the only thing they said, the initial emitted target man was not scored as varied or invariable. And then
Right.
following
Well,
that
yeah,
initial
okay.
one, then they started. So I bet it was very quick. The contingencies were quickly, discriminated hypothetically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty impressive then. If well, I know we haven't talked about results. Maybe we should talk about results.
Results.
And then I'll say whether it's impressive or not.
Right. So challenging behavior was pretty high for both participants, ranging from 2 responses per minute, 0 to 2 responses per minute in baseline. And then what's nice is that in the FCT lag 0 for both participants, we see an immediate decrease in challenging behavior and an immediate increase in total man. So they are manding.
Yeah. They got
and
it.
they've got 0 rates of challenging behavior. And then they implement an FCT lag 1 schedule, and you still see low rates of challenging behavior, 0, basically next to 0, except for like 1 data point. And you see increased varied mans and increased total mans. So that's really nice that you do see that varied of the lag 1 schedule. And you see that replicated across both participants and all of the different phases that they go through. So nice is that when they return to baseline, problem behaviors increased for both participants, but for all of the FCT conditions, problem behaviors were at near 0 levels. It's pretty awesome.
So you had your FCT, you had your novel FCRs, and no resurgence.
No, they did not see any resurgence.
Yeah. So like that initial, in the lag 1 schedule, the initial man is not reinforced.
Right.
So then they just started asking in different ways, and they didn't go back to the challenging behavior.
Right. So that's surprising.
That's
very surprising.
Yeah.
You would expect to see sort of the dollar in the soda machine extinction burst of I'm asking for it, I'm asking for it again, I'm asking for it louder. So either these students had a lot of FCR variability in their repertoire that they just never used, and it wasn't a big response effort to switch it up, or I don't know what else could have happened.
Right. Well, they do say that this is actually one of the limitations, though, because this is not a traditional resurgence paradigm.
Yeah.
So we can't definitely say that, using an FCT lag 1 schedule is not going to promote resurgence of challenging behavior. And
like for some individuals,
here it
did in these 2 participants.
Right. But they said, this is something that it needs more investigation. So they're not like, look at this, we did it. Resurgence did not occur. Woo-woo. They're like, hey, it didn't, but we don't know why.
Definitely could be some other
contingencies at play. Yeah.
Participants or different profiles where you would most certainly see the return of that.
Yeah. So they do say that this is another area of future research is to actually implement this FCT lag 1 schedule within a resurgence paradigm.
Yeah. Or provide some prompting to teach the varied man.
Yeah.
If that's not already in the repertoire, and see what that looks like as it plays out.
So I know it's so quick. It's such a quick little quick little read, but it's so fun, and I think it's so applicable, right? It addresses one of the harshest criticisms of ABA, that we just teach robots and rote responding, but also promotes variability in responding, sees a decrease in challenging behavior, and then it really helps to increase, our knowledge about FCT and how we can, use it across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's cool.
I love it. I would love to do this with a longer lag schedule though, like a FCT 2, FCT lag 2 or lag 3. You wouldn't necessarily have to though, but it would be interesting to look at to see when responding breaks down and challenging behavior emerges.
Do you think you could run the risk of using a lag schedule and teaching a sort of persistent FCR across different topographies of that response? Because I know one of the things that is also usually lobbied against the use of FCT is, but we can't give that kid attention all the time just because they ask for it. Would this potentially be, now they're asking for attention in 50 different ways, and we still don't want to give it to them? So now it's just even more annoying of a problem. I mean, would that be a risk different than, say, setting up those simple contingencies of, hold on, first do blank, then I'll give you attention? Like, could you throw it all together, you think?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a treatment package, right? So we would see if the treatment package would work, and if it did, then we would probably do a component analysis, probably to see, what's affecting it. But if you're using a large lag schedule, you inherently are building in a delay to reinforcer, right? Delay reinforcement. So,
but it wouldn't be a delay to reinforcement in terms of, hold on, let me do some work first.
Oh,
it
hell
would
no.
be,
Yeah.
Hold on, please say as many ways of look at me as you can.
Can I have a cookie? I want a
Think of
cookie.
another way
What
to
about
say it.
that cookie? Yeah.
Some cookies? Yeah.
Did I hear there were cookies in here?
Yeah, so I love these articles that are to the point. They're very applied, and they look at different ways that we're using the basic research in an applied way.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of applied ways of using our research, let's pull our old discussion train into dissemination station.
Man, it's really steamy.
In this station of
Is it
dissemination.
a steam engine that we've been riding on? Steam engine?
The steam engine, yeah.
The dissemination
Nice.
engine.
That's perfectly
Thank you.
executed.
So FCT, training or response? No, that's not a good debate topic. So we've got mostly two articles that sort of go through the basics of FCT. Some of the strengths being, A, it's a good time to review the classic Carr and Durand article. B, I think we now have a great article to pull up for someone who'd like to hear more about FCT, but probably doesn't have the background to just get a really hard research article thrown at them. And then we have kind of a new direction for FCT that goes against one of the criticisms of it. And I kind of want to spend a little time talking about that idea of the criticism of FCT. It's so easy. It's function-based treatment. Why do I get the sense from a lot of other practitioners it gets kind of a bad rap? Do you ever feel that way?
No?
I don't feel that way, but I've heard it before in the criticism that I've said that we're teaching them only one way to access a reinforcer, and we're teaching a rote response, and we can't possibly reinforce every response, so we'll see that behavior decrease anyway. Those are the things I have heard, but that's just a general criticism of ABA in general, I think.
I've had some very strong kind of fights against this as a treatment. The idea of, well, I don't want to give him attention. He should be doing his work without attention because it's fun to do work. I get a lot of that. The idea of
I see.
why, and it's very hard to just explain. Well, I'll be honest with you. I've observed your classroom, or I observed this behavior. This kid's getting all the reinforcement that they want, but right now they're doing it by flipping a desk or screaming at you or doodling on their homework or whatever the response is. So you can either give it to them through language, and then we can fade out how often you have to give it to them, or you can just let this keep happening. And nobody really likes that response. You think they would, but nobody really loves that as an idea either. They sort of just, why can't kids just be good? Because don't we do things because we have an inherent goodness in us?
I haven't heard that in a long time, actually.
Yeah, I think it does get back to a common criticism is why can't the natural contingencies that are in place for everyone work for this particular student?
I say that they will work once we give them the appropriate response, right? So most kids in the classroom, that's what I'll say, most kids in the classroom, when they want attention, will say, teacher, I need help with my assignment, or teacher, blah, blah, come here. Or they may, they're not throwing discs. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just that it's maybe not having enough knowledge about behavioral principles and why behavior occurs, right? Because eventually, intrinsically, hopefully, once we've taught them the response, we won't need to program for things because the natural contingencies of the environment should take over.
It's true that the two maintaining variables that we often talk about, attention and escape from demands, are common maintaining variables for any student's behavior. Right. And when I talk to folks about doing an FA or even just understanding what the maintaining variables are, I always try to present it in a really positive light, in the sense that we want to figure out what's a reinforcer. But another way to think about that is we want to figure out what's really valuable to this child. Mm-hmm. And by breaking this down and really looking at it, now we know that one of the most important things to them out of everything in the world is attention, your attention, right? And now we know that, and that's so important. They've been able to tell us that through this whole process. And because we know that that's so important, that's what we're going to make sure we teach them how to ask for properly.
Yeah.
Kind of the last point, because I know we're running a little long. What about the idea of FCT as behavioral inoculation? Does that sound like a possibility? Does that sound like something they were just sort of throwing around back in 2000? How would you even determine that this could be used to inoculate against further behaviors? Any thoughts?
I think it's important when you're teaching a functional communication response to make sure that the response that you're introducing is of a lower response effort than the current behavior that's producing the maintaining variable. I think it can be easy, like we're saying. Everyone wants that end goal of someone sitting nicely in their chair and raising their hand and saying, Miss So-and-so, can you come over here and help me with my homework? And we may not be at that point when we're first starting, right? And trying to jump to that end and really strain the level of response that we're looking for to be too high can end up producing a lot of additional challenging behavior. So recognizing where we need to start, making that initial response really, really simple so that we can flip the contingency and have the functional communication response be occurring more and more, and we're able to hopefully extinguish that other response by having a really high level of reinforcement available, should hopefully produce this type of inoculation that you're looking for. If we can make it easy, simple, a hand raise, a card touch, a tap on the shoulder initially, and then we can build it up into a longer response, into a varied response, into a delay to reinforcement, then we'll eventually get to where we're going and have that response be something that can hopefully maintain in a more natural way and in a general education environment. But we can't start there. So if we want this to be something that really does maintain on its own, then we have to be looking at both the short term and the long term.
Right, using habilitation.
Yeah. And the right to eat too many donuts.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks both of you for this fun discussion of FCT, the classic FCT training articles that we love FCT. So much. So if you've been listening so far and would like to apply for continuing education credits, listen up. It's time for your second secret code word, which is mouse. Mouse. He's the leader of the club who's made for you and me. I'm not going to. No, it's a little creature. We did mouse already, didn't we?
No.
Okay.
I know them all.
Okay. So that's mouse. Well, everyone at home, thanks so very much for listening to this show. We've been doing this show for about a year now, so if you've been with us since the beginning or if you just heard about us from a colleague, we're very, very excited to hear from you. So there are a couple ways that you can contact us. One is certainly by directly emailing us at abainsidetrack@gmail.com. You can check out our webpage, abainsidetrack.com, where you can leave comments or any feedback there as well. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher, Google Play, anywhere you can find podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter or go to our Facebook page at ABA Inside Track, or facebook.com/ABA Inside Track, where we've been trying to put as many posts as we can through the week.
Rocking it. Really, really rocking it.
Thank you. So posts that we think people who are practitioners will find useful, and then also some that are just sort of fun or goofy. I know that our our meme pictures seem to do very well, whereas some of my more, thinking posts, maybe not what everyone wants to read on their commute or whatnot. But that's okay.
Don't read while you drive, people.
No,
Yeah.
that's why you listen to the show, I suppose, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But in any
If
case,
you take the tea. You can.
yeah, if you take the tea. We hope to have something for everybody, so please join us there and feel free to comment. And you can also find us on YouTube where our preview videos go up, and sometimes we have other videos. So lots of places that we are.
We're everywhere.
We're everywhere.
Even in your dreams.
Thanks, Freddie Krueger, for joining us on the show. Well, Jackie and Diana, thanks so much for being here. Everyone at home, thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with one of our patented preview episodes, but until then, keep responding. Bye.
Bye.